Hello everyone and welcome to Split Second. If you haven't heard, tomorrow there will be another big online tournament held by the PlayEDH Discord, and some of us will be attending. You will be able to watch the stream in the PlayEDH Twitch page, link in the description below. This week, Elder brought his take on the Reality Ship, a combo deck focused around its commander's future sight ability to draw the whole deck with Sensei's top, and win from there. Bal is piloting Double Base, a spicy Yarok build from Hisoka and the Mormonator. Rodrigo brought his pet list for Jeska and Thrasius, a deck that wants to do three things: make mana, make more mana, then make infinite mana. And from the CDH Portuguese League we have Afonso, the Abzan aficionado. However, today he ditched two colors to bring his Yawgmoth Throne Physician. Elder is going first and he mulligan once, finding an island and a Misty Rainforest for lands, with a Jewel Lotus to ensure his commander is out on turn 1, Elixir of Immortality in order to shuffle his deck if he so needs while looping top, Artificer's Intuition to help search and assemble his combo, as well as Tribute Mage, Wash Away for interaction. Bal kept his first hand with a Rejuvenating Springs and City of Brass for lands, paired with Chromox and Elvish Mystic for ramp, Rhystic Study for card draw, Flusterstorm for interaction and Diabolic Intent to pivot his game plan. Rodrigo mulligan once, finding an Ancient Tomb and Steam Vents for lands, able to cast Arcane Signet on turn 1 as well as Elvish Mystic for extra ramp. Biomancer's Familiar is great to grind the game with Thrasius, and then he has Swansong for interaction, as well as Finale of Devastation to find a possible combo piece. Last but not least, Afonso kept a single swamp but plenty of ramp in Mana Crypt, Mana Vault and Dark Ritual, allowing him for a turn 1 Yawgmoth if he so wishes. Animate Dead is mostly aimed to reanimate Vilis or any juicy creature from an opponent. Blood Artist is one of the outlets to his Undying combos, and Wake the Dead is a way to allow him to win at instant speed on an opponent's turn. Ready for this match? Elder starts the game with a Misty Rainforest, cracking it for an island. He then casts his Jewel Lotus and brings out his Reality Ship, taking a peek at his top deck card before passing. Bal plays a Rejuvenating Springs and casts a Chromox, actually imprinting his Diabolic Intent. He then casts an Elvish Mystic and passes. Rodrigo plays an Ancient Tomb and casts his Arcane Signet, but still adds an Elvish Mystic to the ramp before passing. Afonso plays a Swamp and casts a Mana Crypt. He follows with Dark Ritual, but as everyone passes, Rodrigo casts his top deck Mental Misstep, stopping Afonso's attempt at casting his commander. He still casts his Mana Vault and finishes the turn. Elder plays an island and peeks at his top deck before passing. You know, that cheating friend that's always picking at the top card? Well, that will be Elder today. Bal plays a City of Brass and casts his Rhystic Study, which does resolve, hindering Elder's plans to infinitely cast Sensei's top. We're back to Rodrigo. He plays an untapped Steam Vents paying 2 life and ponders his options. He casts a Talisman of Creativity, triggering Rhystic and not paying. He then follows with Thrasius Triton Hero, triggering Rhystic once again but paying this time. Elder ponders on his Wash Away but lets it resolve. We're now on Afonso's turn and he wins the crit roll. He found his second swamp and proceeds to cast Yawgmoth Throne Physician, triggering Rhystic and not paying. However, this time Elder brings out his Wash Away in response, triggering and paying for the Rhystic Study. Afonso does let it stay in the graveyard as he still has Animate Dead at hand, and finishes his turn. Elder plays another island and painfully casts a Tribute Mage, triggering Rhystic but unable to pay. It enters play, triggering, and he searches for an Ethereum Sculptor to his hand before passing. In his end step, Bal casts a Vampiric Tutor and searches for a Culling Ritual. He gets to his turn, plays a Marshlands and cracks it for an Underground Sea. He then casts Culling Ritual, however, to his dismay, Rodrigo casts a Swansong in response, triggering Rhystic and unable to pay for it. This way, Bal is forced to respond with a Dispel, losing access to his only blue mana that would allow to cast his Yarok. Bal adds 5 black and 4 green mana to his pool. With 2 of those, he casts a Tainted Pact, trying to look for something to dump all his mana. He finds a Wishclaw Talisman, which is great since it leaves his options open. He still casts a Llanowar Elves and passes the turn. Rodrigo draws and simply plays a tapped Shatterskull of the Hammerpass, finishing his turn. Afonso finds and plays a Phyrexian Tower. After scanning his opponent's graveyards, he casts an Animate Dead, targeting his Yawgmoth in the graveyard. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. 3rd times is the charm, and he finally gets his commander. We're back to Elder, and he wants to dump half his hand, but Rhystic Study is preventing him from doing so without giving Bal 4 cards, so he simply passes the turn, playing responsibly. Bal plays a Tropical Island, and having Flusterstorm in hand, he doesn't feel like tapping out for his commander, so he casts an Eternal Witness, entering and triggering to return his Vampiric Tutor to his hand, finishing his turn. Rodrigo top decks a Mystic Remora, which he casts, triggering Rhystic, and Bal responds to it with his Vampiric Tutor, searching for a Jewel Lotus, since he suspects his elf won't last long and he wants to protect Yarok on the stack. Rodrigo does not pay for the Rhystic, and with all the chatting, Bal does forget to draw the card. We're back to Afonso's turn. He casts his Blood Artist, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, and activates Yawgmoth, paying 1 life to sacrifice the Artist and put a -1/-1 counter on Llanowar Elves, triggering the Artist and gaining that life back. The Elf dies and Afonso draws a card. He found a swamp and then he passes. Elder is feeling the game slip from his fingers, since now the non-creature spells he wants to cast would feed 2 players, so he passes with 7 cards in hand. Bal draws and casts the Jeweled Lotus, triggering Remora and not paying. He follows it with his Yarok, and it does resolve. After that he goes to combat, attacking Rodrigo for 2 and passing the turn. Rodrigo does pay for the Remora's cumulative upkeep, but draws a non-green land, Training Center. He follows that with a Chrome Mox, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. He imprints a Finale of Devastation as he desperately needs to get access to green mana and recasts his commander Thrasius, triggering Rhystic and not paying before passing. Afonso draws and simply passes. Joking around, he's bluffing the opposition agent.
Eu gosto de fazer bluff que tenho o opposition agent.
Elder draws and plays an island. He feels like he can't just sit and wait, so he casts a Semblance Anvil, triggering Rhystic and Remora and not paying for either. It resolves and he imprints an Elixir of Immortality. This way, he casts a 1-mana Ethereum Sculptor, triggering Rhystic and not paying, and follows it with a Mox Opal, triggering Rhystic and the fish and unable to pay. And now he recasts his commander, the Reality Ship, for 1 single blue mana due to his cost reducers. Rhystic triggers and he can't pay. He picks at the top card and passes. In his end step still, Bal casts an Abrupt Decay on Rodrigo's Mystic Remora, triggering it and unable to pay. Without the fish around, Bal expects to go for a win. He plays an Undergrowth Stadium and follows it with a Mana Vault. With it, he activates his Wishclaw Talisman, and Afonso did have Opposition Agent all along. Rhystic triggers, but Afonso pays for it. He checks Bal's hand before tutoring his deck. Having seen Entomb, he was looking for a Razaketh, but having none, he goes for an Intuition. Bal passes the Wishclaw to Elder since he's the player to his right, and people can maybe stack up protection for a bounce to Oppo, so he doesn't win. Bal pays back the favor to Afonso, attacking him for 3 before passing. Rodrigo finally found a forest. He casts his Biomancer Familiar, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, passing afterwards with 2 possible activations. Afonso is also okay with the Draw-Go strategy, as he now has an Intuition at the ready. Elder draws and picks at his next card. He plays a Gemstone Caverns and then reconfigures his Reality Ship onto Tribute Mage and passes his turn. Bal draws and takes 1 from the Mana Vault. He plays a Sapphire Coliseum and activates it right away, targeting himself to dig for fuel, drawing and discarding 3 cards. He then attacks Afonso since he's the one that uses his life to draw cards from Yawgmoth. Then, on his end step, Rodrigo activates Thrasius once, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Pact of Negation. He does it again, scrying and leave it on top, and revealing a Cyclonic Rift. He proceeds to his turn, draws and finds no lands, so he passes fully untapped with the exact mana for Cyclonic Rift. In his end step, however, Afonso fires the Intuition he got from Opposition Agent, triggering Rhystic and not paying, knowing Bal still has Flusterstorm and this way he could pay for it. He finds Geralt's Messenger, Butcher Ghoul and Pawn of Ulamog, hinting at having another way to reanimate one of those and combo to clear the board and draw cards in the process. Elder was the target and gives him Geralt's Messenger. Afonso gets to his turn and keeps the Draw-Go plan. Since Psych Rift is imminent, he can keep open mana for Opposition Agent if needed. We're back to Elder, and this seems like it will be a long game. He casts a Lotus Petal, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. Tight in options, he casts a Tezzeret the Seeker from the top of his library, thanks to the Reality Ship. Rhystic triggers and he cracks the petal to pay for it. With the agent on the field, he cannot get Sensei Stop, so he upticks Tezzeret to untap his Mox Opal and wants to pass. However, in Elder's second main phase, specifically not his end step, Bal casts an Assassin's Trophy on Rodrigo's Ancient Tomb, in order to force him to float mana in this precise step or fire his Cyclonic Rift right away, which he does, triggering Rhystic and unable to pay. The Rift resolves, and still in response to the Assassin's Trophy, Afonso fires his Opposition Agent, since Rodrigo is still in a good spot mana-wise to grind his Thrasius. This way he declines the search. This was all done in Elder's second main phase, so priority is reset and Elder recasts his Mox Opal, before trying to end his turn, and now on his end step Bal fires a Lim-Dûl's Vault. Rodrigo mentions he should have pacted, so the game doesn't take too long, but Bal ends up stopping it at the second iteration, paying only 1 life. He gets to his turn, draws and plays this awesome looking Gaia's Cradle, beautifully altered by MSJ Altars. Special thanks and shout out to her awesome work. Check her work in the links in the description below. He then casts a Mana Vault and follows it with his Rhystic Study, but Elder promptly responds with the Force of Negation, exiling Tribute Mage to it, since Rhystic stops his whole game plan. However, Bal had Flusterstorm at the ready. With 1 semi-stacked piece on the board, he follows it with another, Dauthi Voidwalker, hoping to delay Afonso's undying plans. He then finishes the turn with an Elves of Deep Shadow. Rodrigo gets to his turn and plays an untapped Seagate Reborn, paying 3 life. With 3 Thrasios activations available, he passes the turn. Afonso finally finds a land, a Verdant Catacombs that he cracks for his swamp. He ponders his options and fires a Meathook Massacre X=2, triggering Rhystic and not paying for it. But after some thinking, Bal responds with a Force of Will, pitching his Yarok, so he doesn't lose 3 mana and Dothi, which is locking Afonso so far. With 7 cards in hand, Afonso passes. Elder untaps for his turn and starts with an Ethereum Sculptor, triggering Rhystic and not paying since 2 of the 3 cards in Bal's hand are known from the previous Rift. Elder then casts his Commander from his hand, costing only 1, and not paying for Rhystic trigger. He then reconfigures it onto Ethereum Sculptor, and passes after picking his top deck. Bal draws and takes 1 from the Mana Vault. He plays his Scalding Tarn and ponders for his second, before casting his Eternal Witness, entering and targeting his Dispel to retrieve it to his hand. He wants to try to resolve Culling Ritual once again, so now he casts Phantasmal Image, resolving and entering as a copy of Iwit, triggering to return Culling Ritual to his hand. He then casts a Sacrifice, sacrificing his Phantasmal Witness as an additional cost, to provide him 3 black mana to his pool. As he is demonstrating he'll have enough mana for Culling Ritual and Dispel, Rodrigo responds by activating Thrasios, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Bloom Tender. He does it again, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Whirly Tutor. One last activation, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Submerge. So Sacrifice does resolve, and Bal goes ahead with Culling Ritual, to take Rodrigo from his Draw-Go plan. Rodrigo doesn't fire his Pact of Negation, and Bal gains 9 mana from green and black, that he uses to then cast his Yarok the Desecrated, which also resolves, so he passes the turn and we're back at ground zero somehow. Rodrigo untaps and casts a Wild Growth on his Seagate Reborn. Rhystic triggers and he pays for it. He then casts a Bloom Tender, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, before passing the turn with 7 cards in hand. Afonso is sandbagging as much as he can, but failing to find lands, so he casts his Yawgmoth, which is almost attacked by a Wild Kitty. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay for it, finishing his turn. Turn 10 with no stacks decks at the table? Go figure. Elder simply draws and passes. Bal draws and goes straight into combat, still pressuring Afonso. In his second main phase, he plays a Morphic Pool and casts a Chain of Vapor on his own Eternal Witness. Rodrigo is soft on his Pact trigger and passes priority, so Elder comes forward and casts a March of Swirling Mist, X=4, targeting Eternal Witness, Yarok, Bloom Tender and Yawgmoth. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay, and the drawn card makes Bal really want to protect his board, so he fires his Dispel in response, and taps his Cradle as well for double green. In response, Rodrigo casts a free Submerge on the Eternal Witness, triggering Rhystic and paying for it, and Bal shows his top-decked Fierce Guardianship. The table talks about Afonso killing the Iwit with Yawgmoth, but from the 2 cards in Bal's hand, one is the Wishclaw Talisman and Afonso doesn't feel like being set further behind, so Rodrigo does fire his Pact of Negation on the Dispel, hoping the March of the Swirling Mist resolves, and as he would phase in his Bloom Tender, he could go for an infinite mana loop and win. Rhystic triggers and he can't pay, so Bal draws and instantly reveals a Miscast, which he casts targeting the March of the Swirling Mist. As last resource, Afonso does activate his Yawgmoth, sacrificing the opposition agent to kill the Eternal Witness and draw a card, which in the end was all that Bal actually wanted, to deal with the Oppo. The huge stack is cleared and Bal cracks his Scalding Tarn for an untapped Watery Grave, paying 2 life. He then casts his Wishclaw Talisman and searches for an Unearth, giving the talisman to Elder. He proceeds to cast Unearth on Eternal Witness, which enters play and triggers twice thanks to Yarok, targeting Unearth and Sacrifice in the graveyard to be returned to his hand. This way, he can demonstrate a loop where he casts Sacrifice, sacrificing Eternal Witness and gaining 3 black mana with it. He uses 1 to cast Unearth and bring Eternal Witness to play, returning both spells to his hand and netting this way 1 black mana positive. This loop generates infinite black mana, and in the end of the loop, with the last Eternal Witness entering play and triggering, he targets Entomb and Unearth to return to his hand, and he casts Entomb, searching for an Acererak the Archleys to the graveyard, and then casts Unearth targeting Acererak, which enters play and triggers to be returned to his hand and venturing into the dungeon, and he ventures into the lost mine of Phandelver. He recasts Acererak enough times to kill his opponents each time he goes through the Dark Pool, and since he has more cards in his library than his opponent's highest life total, he doesn't lose to deck out. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. With fast starts all around, Rhystic Study ended up being a great hindrance to Elder's main plan, and Culling Ritual reset the board twice, also slowing Rodrigo's plans to win. Opposition Agent was key in stopping Bal and Rodrigo from tutoring game-ending pieces earlier, and Afonso being last in turn order was heavily affected by the board wipes and lack of mana. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rapp, Mike Burr, Ajimu, Drunken House Cat, V, RJ, Hitachill, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonsake, Katerina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt and Wicked, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.